The first time my mother-in-law erased me in public, she did it beneath my late father-in-law's smiling face. His portrait hung above the ribbon at the new location launch in Irvine. Same apron. Same restaurant name. Same family story. Just not the same truth. My brother-in-law stood beside her in a navy suit, smiling for cameras like he had built that kitchen with his own hands. He had not. I stood near the curb in cold rain, holding one small glass jar with a red lid against my chest. That was all I carried out the night they threw me out. My mother-in-law saw me and lifted her chin. Then she said it loud enough for the guests, investors, and food bloggers to hear. She was only the help. She has no place here. Nobody corrected her. Nobody stepped in. They kept smiling, clapping, filming, tasting broth that did not belong to them. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not beg. I only held that jar tighter. Because the strangest part was never being pushed out. It was what they believed belonged to them before the first camera turned. That jar was never about sentiment. Nobody in that crowd understood that. My father-in-law sealed it himself after every finished broth base. Red lid. Clear glass. One strip of aging tape around the rim. He never let anyone else touch it after closing. The winter before he died, he told me one thing. People can copy a bowl. They cannot copy the foundation. Back then I thought he meant patience. Heat. Timing. The quiet choices that make broth taste deep instead of loud. Standing there in the rain, I realized he had meant something larger. Not just flavor. Not just memory. Something protected. Something my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were too busy counting to see. I held the jar and watched servers carry steaming bowls beneath my father-in-law's name. Then I looked up at the banner again. For the first time that morning I felt calm. That was the moment I knew they had already made a mistake before the cameras finished rolling outside. Before I take you back to the night they pushed me out, tell me where you are watching from. Because what happened next was not about grief. It was about greed. And greed always speaks too soon when people think the kitchen belongs to them without asking who cooked it. My name is Lin Tran. I am 34 years old. I live in Westminster, California, in the middle of Little Saigon. For 10 years, I worked as the head cook and kitchen manager at my late father-in-law's pho restaurant. And right now, I am telling you this, because some families only call you family while your hands are still building their future. I was not born into that kitchen. I married into it. Then I stayed after my husband died. Not because anyone begged me to stay. Because his father asked me to. He never spoke like a sentimental man. He spoke like someone measuring heat. If broth was weak, he said it. If money got loud, he noticed that too. In that family, everyone had a lane. My father-in-law guarded the standard. I guarded the stove. My mother-in-law guarded appearances. My brother-in-law chased expansion before he understood the business. That difference sounds small. It was not. One side cared about value. The other cared about price. I learned early that silence has texture. My mother-in-law liked polished tables, donor photos, and compliments from customers she never served. My brother-in-law liked words like growth, scaling, margin, and rollout. They both smiled easily when reporters came around. Neither of them stayed for cleanup. I did. I opened the stock pots before sunrise. I broke bones down for broth. I checked spice ratios by smell, not by charts. I knew which regular wanted extra scallions and which one needed the salt dialed back. I knew what the restaurant meant when the dining room went quiet after the first spoonful. My father-in-law respected that. He saw the difference between labor and ownership, between noise and stewardship. That is why, when he started taking meetings in back offices and closing the door, he started bringing me with him. He never explained much. He only told me to sit down, listen carefully, save every document, and learn which people in a room talked like owners, and which ones only talked like thieves for later use. The restaurant sat off Bolsa Avenue in a plaza with a dry cleaner on one side and a bakery on the other. It was never flashy. The booths were plain. On cold mornings, the front windows fogged up before the first customers walked in. But by 7:30, the room had its own rhythm. Steam rose from the broth. Porcelain clicked. Someone always asked for more lime. Someone always said it tasted the way it used to. My father-in-law cared about that sentence more than money. He never called the recipe a secret. He called it a responsibility. If the broth drifted even a little, he could taste it in one spoonful. Then he would set the bowl down and say one word. Again. That was how he trained me. He taught me to char onions until the edges turned dark, not burned. He taught me when star anise needed restraint. He taught me that sweetness should arrive late, not first. He taught me that real depth feels quiet in the mouth. He also taught me what not to trust. He did not trust people who loved the dining room but never stepped into the prep area. He did not trust compliments from men who talked about potential before flavor. And he did not trust family just because they were family. I understood why over time. My mother-in-law liked magazine mentions framed near the register. My brother-in-law liked standing near the hostess station when reporters visited. He started talking about second locations before he could tell fresh stock from watered stock. My father-in-law heard everything. He just did not answer fast. About a year before he died, he changed in one way. Once a month, sometimes twice, he told me to leave the kitchen early and ride with him. We would drive to an office park in Fountain Valley or a low brick building in Santa Ana. Upstairs. Quiet hallways. Closed doors. Inside were people in shirts, neat folders, and voices that never rose. He would slide papers across tables. Listen more than he spoke. Ask short questions. Then look at me and tell me to save every copy. I never asked why in front of anyone. I only noticed the pattern. When money talk got louder, those meetings happened more often. When my brother-in-law said words like expansion and licensing, my father-in-law went silent for the rest of the night. Then he would lock the office drawer himself. And every time before we left, he touched that red-lidded jar once with 2 fingers, like he was counting something nobody else in the room could see yet. 3 weeks after the funeral, the language in the house changed. My mother-in-law stopped saying your father-in-law built this place. She started saying the family built this place. Then a few days later, she shortened it again. She started calling the restaurant a family asset. That was the first shift. The second came from my brother-in-law. He began showing up with printed market reports, lease maps, and coffee cups he never finished. He stood near the kitchen door and talked about traffic, margins, and brand recognition like flavor was a side issue. One afternoon, he brought 2 men in pressed shirts to a back table. I served them tea and kept moving. He thought I was too busy to listen. I was not. He pointed at the dining room and said this concept can scale. Then he tapped the bowl in front of him and said the broth is branding. The rest is operations. I kept my face still. But that was the moment I knew something underneath the surface had already started. People who understand food do not talk like that. People who respect legacy do not flatten it into a slogan. And people who built nothing always speak fastest when money enters the room. After that, his questions got sharper. Who had the clean logo files? Who handled vendor agreements? Who could sign for a second location? Who had the original spice ratios written down? Who controlled the old photos of my father-in-law? He asked those questions casually. Too casually. My mother-in-law noticed it too. But instead of slowing him down, she started helping. She brought out old framed newspaper clippings. She polished the story. She turned memory into a sales deck without saying the words out loud. That was when I stopped confusing grief with loyalty. He was not asking how to protect the restaurant. He was asking how to extract it. There is a difference. A small one on paper. A deadly one inside that kitchen. Listen carefully. Some people do not wait for morning to end. They wait for the paperwork to go quiet. I know. Some of you watching this have felt that exact cold turn. You reach for the people who should protect you, and all you feel back is calculation. If that is you, leave me a comment below. I read every one. And if this story hits somewhere deep, subscribe now. Because what happened at our dining table the night it finally came into the open still lives in my chest. It happened on a Thursday night. Rain tapped the back windows. The dining table was cleared too neatly. No bowls. No tea. Just papers. My suitcase was already by the front door. My mother-in-law looked at the clock, not me. My brother-in-law sat at the table with a folder open. He wanted the room to feel official. My mother-in-law folded her hands. We need to be practical now. The restaurant must move forward. The family cannot stay stuck in grief. I sat down without removing my wet coat. My brother-in-law slid the packet toward me. This keeps things clean. You move out tonight. You stop representing the restaurant. You let the family handle the transition. I looked at the first page. No explanation. Just conclusions dressed like decisions. My mother-in-law said you do not need to read every page. We are trying to make this easy for everyone. That was when I looked at him. If it is simple, read it. He leaned back. I am not reading all that. It is simple. I kept my eyes on him. Then read the licensing section aloud. His jaw tightened. My mother-in-law cut in fast. This is not the time for technical language. I turned another page. There were references to future operations and future use of the name. Too many future words. Too much speed. I asked one question. Who asked for this draft? My brother-in-law said counsel prepared it. I asked which counsel. He did not answer. My mother-in-law stood. Her voice stayed calm. This house belongs to family. This restaurant belongs to family. And you need to remember what you are. Only the cook. That was what she meant. I stood. I did not raise my voice. I remember exactly what I am. Do you? Rain hit harder against the glass. My suitcase waited by the door like the decision had been made hours earlier. I walked past them toward the kitchen. My mother-in-law told me to leave the keys. My brother-in-law said, do not take anything that belongs to the restaurant. I opened the walk-in cooler. Cold air hit my face. Second shelf. Back corner. The small glass jar with the red lid was still there. That was the last thing I picked up. When I came back, my mother-in-law gave a short laugh. Take your little souvenir if it helps you sleep. My brother-in-law looked relieved. He thought I was leaving with nothing that mattered. I took my suitcase with one hand and the jar with the other. Then I looked at both of them. You should have read it. Then I walked out into the rain. I spent the first week after that night in a furnished studio above a laundromat in Garden Grove. The room smelled like detergent and old paint. The mattress dipped in the middle. The window faced an alley where delivery trucks backed in before sunrise. None of that mattered. What mattered was silence. For the first time in 10 years, nobody called from the front counter. Nobody asked whether table 6 needed more broth. Nobody lowered their voice when I walked near the office door. I set the red-lidded jar on the desk and opened every copy my father-in-law had told me to keep. Not dramatically. Carefully. Page by page. That was when the patterns stopped looking emotional and started looking structural. My mother-in-law thought social control was ownership. My brother-in-law thought speed could replace authority. They were both wrong. The first layer came from family. Within days, relatives started calling. An aunt said grief had made me selfish. A cousin said my father-in-law would never have wanted division. An uncle asked why I was holding the family hostage over a recipe. That word mattered. Recipe. Small. Domestic. Emotional. Easy to use against a widow in a family that wanted the story neat. My mother-in-law knew what she was doing. She was building a moral version before anyone had to face a legal one. In her version, she was protecting legacy. My brother-in-law was saving jobs. I was the unstable woman clinging to kitchen scraps because I could not accept change. It was clean. It traveled well. And it worked on people who preferred simple stories. I did not call anyone back. I let them repeat themselves. Then I wrote down every phrase. Family asset. Shared legacy. Everyone knows the name belongs to us. She only worked there. The restaurant has to grow. None of those phrases described a right. They described entitlement. It did not stop with family. Word spread through the neighborhood too. A supplier asked whether I was taking my own concept somewhere else. One regular customer leaned across a bakery counter and asked why I was punishing the family after everything they had done for me. That was the real power of my mother-in-law. She never needed to shout. She only needed to place the first version in the room and let everyone else repeat it until it sounded like memory. By the end of that week, even strangers were offering advice about a kitchen they had never once cleaned or opened alone. The second layer came through procedure. 10 days after I left, my brother-in-law posted an announcement online. New era. New chapter. Honoring tradition through expansion. The old restaurant name sat over mock-ups of takeaway bowls and bright new signage. He never mentioned me. He did mention stewardship. He did mention family ownership. He did mention an exciting partnership in development. I read it 3 times. Then I opened a memo my father-in-law had saved. One sentence was underlined in blue ink. Do not confuse operation with control. I sat with that line for a long time. The next morning, I drove past the restaurant before opening. My brother-in-law stood outside with a man carrying measuring tools and a woman taking photos of the storefront. Inside, sample packaging covered the front counter where regulars used to set sugar packets and napkins. He was not protecting the place. He was stripping it into parts he thought he could reproduce. A week later, I learned who the partner was. A regional fast casual chain out of Irvine. Not national, but large enough to move fast and spend hard when they saw a market they wanted. They wanted a Vietnamese comfort concept. My brother-in-law wanted scale. My mother-in-law wanted proof she had backed the winning son. That was their triangle. Status. Scale. Cash. I kept reading. Every email copy my father-in-law told me to save sounded different once I knew what to listen for. People reveal themselves in revisions and in the words they avoid. My brother-in-law loved one word. Representative. Family representative. Brand representative. Estate representative. He used it again and again. He never used owner. That mattered more than anything he said in public. People with rights use owner casually. People without rights circle around it like it might expose them. That was the crack I had been waiting to hear. I still did not know every move he had made. But I knew he was selling confidence before he could sell proof. And confidence is always the cheapest thing in the room. Listen carefully. The room changes when paperwork shows up. At home, my mother-in-law could control tone. She could make silence look guilty and obedience look virtuous. Around relatives, she could wrap greed in words like respect and continuity. Contracts do not care about tone. They care about authority. That was where the third layer began. Once the chain got serious, the questions sharpened. I saw it in the archived email chains and draft replies my father-in-law had told me to save. He had seen this appetite long before he died. Please provide chain of title for the brand assets. Please confirm who has authority to approve sublicensing. Please identify the holder of proprietary seasoning materials and process controls. There it was. Not recipe. Not family story. Not memory. Authority. Holder. Control. My brother-in-law answered like a man trying to cross water on paper shoes. Family continuity will govern transition. Legacy materials remain within the family. Commercial use is fully supported. Supported by whom? That question sat under every page whether anyone typed it or not. Then the chain lawyers pushed harder. Please define family for approval purposes. Please identify the current rights holder by legal name. Please confirm whether any assignments, licenses, or restrictions were executed before the founder's death. My brother-in-law delayed. Reframed. Polished. Talked around direct. Questions. That was when I stopped feeling angry and started feeling certain. Because procedure has a sound when it starts breaking. It sounds polite. Short emails. Long gaps. The same question repeated 3 different ways. A sentence like, just making sure we are aligned showing up twice in 1 week. That sound had started. And once it starts, it does not stop because someone smiles harder at a tasting. My mother-in-law still thought she could overpower process the way she overpowered rooms. She invited community figures to private previews. She called old customers and said the family was finally getting the expansion my father-in-law always wanted. Maybe cameras would come. Maybe that was the point. My brother-in-law printed renderings. Booked branding meetings. Talked about preserving my father-in-law's legacy without once using the word permission. That told me enough. The launch date was set for 6 weeks later. Influencer previews, community press, ribbon cutting, family recipes, modern rollout. Every line of the campaign tried to flatten value into price. The week before launch, my brother-in-law gave an interview to a local food site. I read it on my phone while eating takeout over that laundromat. He said one sentence that made me put the container down. Our family owns the legacy, and now we are ready to scale it. No, your family owned the illusion of it. That is not the same thing. By then, even the chain lawyers had started writing more carefully. Their draft materials stopped using direct ownership language and shifted to rights as represented by the founding family. That was another crack. When lawyers stop using direct nouns, they smell risk. I saved screenshots, printed dates, matched names, built a clean timeline. I could have warned them earlier. I did not. I wanted every false claim tied to one date, with every party in the same place and no private version left to hide behind. And every night before sleeping, I looked once at the red-lidded jar on the desk. Not because it was magical, because some things stay quiet only until someone forces them to be read aloud. Launch morning arrived dry, which felt insulting after the night they pushed me into rain. The new location stood in Irvine with clean glass, wood tables, and a photo of my father-in-law above the counter. Beneath it sat a slogan about tradition reimagined. My brother-in-law loved language like that. Words that sounded respectful while hollowing everything out. Cars filled the lot before 10. Influencers held phones near the front doors. A local reporter adjusted her microphone. Staff in pressed aprons carried sample bowls from the kitchen to the tasting station like this had all been earned honestly. My mother-in-law wore cream and pearls. She greeted donors and anyone with a camera. My brother-in-law moved fast between the host stand and the entrance, smiling hard, performing ownership. I stood near the edge of the crowd with a black folder in one hand and the red-lidded jar in the other. I did not need the jar for proof. I brought it because some symbols deserve to witness the end. The chain had outside counsel there. Gray suit, calm face. The kind of man who had learned to separate performance from liability. I watched him shake hands, scan signage, and study the banner twice. He smelled a problem. The ribbon was stretched across 2 polished posts. My mother-in-law stepped forward. She thanked the community. She thanked the chain. She thanked my late father-in-law for building something worthy of growth. Then she looked at me. Some people cannot let go of the past, she said. But legacy belongs to family, not to bitterness. A few people turned toward me. That was when my lawyer walked through the crowd. He did not rush. He handed one envelope to outside counsel, one to the regional operations director, and one to the property manager beside the entrance. Same packet. Same timing. Clean service. Public enough to stop the show. My brother-in-law saw the logo on the envelope and went pale briefly before fixing his face again. Outside counsel opened his packet first. His eyes moved once down the page, then again slower. My mother-in-law laughed into the microphone and said there must be some misunderstanding. She turned to the crowd with that polished expression she used when she wanted embarrassment to look small. My brother-in-law stepped closer to counsel. It is nothing, he said. Our family handles these matters privately. Counsel did not answer him. He kept reading. My mother-in-law made the mistake that ended everything. Then show them the paperwork, she said. Show them we own it. That was the line. That was the trigger. Outside counsel opened the supporting documents behind the cease and desist. Assignment records. Trademark transfer. Goodwill transfer. Trade secret custody memo. Operating agreement. Limited license. Restriction on sublicensing. Termination upon unauthorized transfer. He stopped at the signature pages. Then he looked at my brother-in-law for the first time like he was no longer a partner in a launch, but a witness in a problem. Who is Lin Tran? He asked. I answered before anyone else could. I am the managing member. The crowd had gone quiet by then. Even the phones seemed lower. My mother-in-law stepped toward me. Her voice stayed controlled. You were the cook. I held her gaze. I was the cook. I was never only the cook. Outside counsel asked the only question that mattered. Did anyone here have authority to grant expansion rights under this name? No one answered. Because now the papers were doing the talking. The old restaurant had been operating under a limited license. The brand name, the goodwill, and the protected seasoning materials had been transferred into an LLC 2 years before my father-in-law died. Expansion, sublicensing, franchising, or any commercial transfer required my written approval. They had none. The operations director took off his event badge. The property manager stepped away from the ribbon. Staff stopped carrying bowls. My brother-in-law tried once more. He said this was a family misunderstanding. That word sounded smaller now. Outside counsel closed the folder. No, he said. This is an authority failure. That was the moment the room changed. Not when my mother-in-law insulted me. Not when they threw me out. Not when the envelopes arrived. When structure replaced story. I set the jar down on the nearest table and looked at both of them. I am not cutting myself off from this family, I said. I am releasing myself from what you turned it into. Nobody clapped. Nobody needed to. The ribbon stayed uncut. The room did not explode after that. It emptied. That was worse for them. Influencers lowered their phones. The reporter stopped smiling into her microphone. Staff moved trays back toward the kitchen without being told. The operations director whispered to outside counsel, then to the property manager, and within minutes the launch music was gone. My mother-in-law still stood near the ribbon. Pearls. Cream suit. Chin lifted. She looked like a woman waiting for the room to remember who she was. It did not. My brother-in-law reached for the folder once, like paper might change if he touched it fast enough. Outside counsel pulled it back and asked him not to touch anything else until their internal review was complete. That was the first real consequence. Not shame. Loss of control. By noon, the temporary brand panels were being covered. By 2, the chain posted a short statement saying the opening was postponed pending review of licensing representations. By evening, the food site that ran my brother-in-law's interview had updated its article with one new sentence. Questions had emerged regarding ownership rights connected to the concept. Questions. That was the polite version of collapse. The old restaurant stayed open for a little while after that. Not because they still had power. Because systems move slower than pride. Vendors began asking who could approve future invoices. Marketing vendors wanted written clarification. The chain froze every transfer tied to the rollout. Then came the demand letters. Misrepresentation. Breach of warranty. Reliance damages. My mother-in-law called them cruel. My brother-in-law called them aggressive. Neither word changed the invoices, the legal fees, or the dates stamped on the packets. I did not go back to watch. I had seen enough. 3 months later, the original restaurant closed on a Tuesday afternoon. No cameras. No statement. Just a paper notice on the glass and the chairs turned upside down inside. A place that once smelled like broth and star anise now smelled like dust and old mop water. People in the neighborhood asked if I felt satisfied. No. Satisfied is too small. A word for what happens when truth finally stands up straight. I felt clear. There is a difference. I did not try to take the old dining room back. I did not fight over the cracked booths or the framed articles by the register. Those things were never the heart of it. I found a smaller space in Fountain Valley near a florist and a tax office. One narrow kitchen. 12 tables. No investor wall. No staged family photos. Just broth. Just discipline. Just the name used the right way. On opening morning, I unlocked the door before sunrise and set the red-lidded jar on a steel shelf behind the line. Then I turned on the burners and listened for that first low sound of heat waking up under the stock pots. That sound felt more honest than any applause. Some regulars found me within the first week. Then more came. They did not ask for the scandal first. They asked for the broth. That meant more to me than sympathy ever could. My father-in-law used to say that boundaries are not punishment. They are the line between what feeds you and what empties you out. He was right. I did not destroy my husband's family. I stopped letting them use me as cover. I did not steal their future. I refuse to finance a lie with my silence. Family is not ownership just because grief gets loud. If your own family sold your work behind your back, would you stay quiet or stop it in public? Tell me below. I read every comment.